So by now you guys should have finished writing chapter 1.6, which we would have discussed last week, which is system software. Now this week we'll be starting chapter 7, 1.7, and that is data processing. And so as per normal, you have until next week's class to complete it. So basically, when it comes to data, there are different ways that data can be processed. Different how, where, when, and why. And that is basically what we'll be looking at today. How different data is processed and what are the advantages and disadvantages of processing the data in those different ways. So to get us started, we'll look at the first two paragraphs. Let me see how far, or the first three paragraphs. Alright, let me read the first one. It says that data must be processed by the most suitable means. It can then be transferred to one or more computer systems for more processing, for output, or for storage. So basically, in order for you to get some sort of data or information that you understand or what you can read or be able to use, you need to process that data. And when you process that data, there's different ways you can use that processed data. One, you can transfer that data to maybe another computer so that the new data can be processed, or that data that was just processed, you can output it in some form. We looked at output devices. It can be output either by maybe the monitor, the screen that you have on your computer, or maybe you can print a copy of it, whatever the case may be that you would have processed. Or you can store that data that you would have processed. So there's always something you would be able to do with that processed data. So now let's look at what is batch processing, and help us with the reading with that. Zamir, can you read for us?
Batch processing. A batch processing system is one where data is collected together in a batch before processing starts. Batch processing is most suitable for tasks where a large amount of data is processed on a regular basis. When a batch job begins, it will continue until it is completed or until an error occurs. Examples of batch processing systems include those that process utility bills such as water and electricity, payroll, payroll systems, and examination report card systems. Credit card companies also process billing in batches. The customer does not receive a bill for each separate credit card purchase, but one monthly bill for that month's purchase. The bill is created through batch processing, where all the data is collected and held until the bill is processed as a batch at the end of the billing cycle.
Good, thank you. So let's take it into parts once again. As so, a batch processing system is one where the data is collected together in a batch before it gets processed. So In order for the data to be processed, it is collected into a certain amount. Either maybe, for example, it gave the example of a utility bill, but we'll use the example of maybe a post office. A post office, when it receives a letter for your home address, the post office does not send out that letter right away. So, as it receives the letter, it doesn't send it out right away. What it would do, it would wait maybe for a certain amount of letters, or it might wait for a certain period and then send out those letters. So that is an example of how batch processing is carried out. It waits for either a certain amount or it can wait for a certain period. Basically, it allows for a batch or a group of data to be collected and then it processes all of those data at once. So the advantage of batch processing is that it is most suitable for tasks where there are large amounts of data. So instead of processing one at a time, one after each other, it processes all of these large amounts of data at once so as to save time. Now, when a batch processing begins, it will continue until it is completed, basically until all of the data has been processed or until it come across an error, basically something that will stop the processing from continuing. Now, examples of batch processing would include utility bills, payrolls, examination report cards, and so on, credit card companies. So the customer does not receive a bill for each separate credit card purchase, but one monthly bill for that month's purchase. The bill is created through batch processing where all data is collected, held until the bill is processed as a batch at the end of the billing cycle. So another example is your bill from GT&T or GPL. Now, you don't get a bill each day telling you how many calls you made on Monday, that you have to pay $200 on Monday. You made so many calls on Tuesday, you have to pay $300. You made so much calls on Wednesday, you have to pay $150. It doesn't work like that. They don't send you a bill for each day. They wait for maybe a month's period, however they want to average it, and they wait for that group of data to be collected and then they would process that data. That is another example of batch processing. They don't process as soon as they get data, but they wait for a group of data in order to process all of that data. So let's look at the advantage and disadvantage of batch processing. Varshini, you could read for us.
Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. What part do I have to read?
The advantages and the disadvantages.
Advantages. Once the data is submitted for processing, the computer may be left running without human interaction. Jobs can be scheduled for a time when the computer is not busy. Disadvantage. There is always a delay before work is processed and returned since batch jobs are usually stored up over a period of time.
Good. So let's break down the advantage and disadvantage. So, first advantage, once the data is submitted, the computer can basically run without any interaction. So you can set up the computer now or the system to process all of this data, and you tell it how to process the data, and you don't need any more interaction from you as the human user. So you program it, you tell it that accept all of these data, accept all of these billing information, process it, do whatever you got to do, create your bill, and that's it. And as we mentioned at the top here, the only time it will stop is if it is completed or if it runs into an error. So, for example, if it gets some sort of data that it cannot process, then it will get an error and it will stop. Otherwise, it would continue without any human interaction. So it's less work on us to process the data. So that's one advantage. Now, the second, jobs can be scheduled when the computer is not busy. So remember now, the computer is waiting for a batch of data. So in that time it is waiting, it is basically not doing anything. So in those periods of time, you can actually use the computer for other tasks. You can schedule other tasks that maybe on Monday you can do this, on Tuesday you do this, on Wednesday you do that. So it is much easier now to schedule tasks because it is not so busy processing data all of the time. So that's another advantage. But the disadvantage is that there is a delay before work is processed. So instead of getting the data right away, because sometimes you might want data right away, but with a batch processing, you have to wait to get that processed data. So basically, there's a delay. And returns since batch jobs usually store up over a period of time. So the disadvantage is that you have to wait. There's a delay before you actually get that processed data. So, any questions on batch processing before we move on? Yes or no?
No, sir.
No, sir.
All right, so we can move on to the next type of data processing, and that is time sharing. Let me see. Okay. So our next reader is going to be Saskia. Can you read for us?
Time sharing. A time sharing system allows many users to share time on a single computer. Each user is given a slice of CPU time by the computer. The computer works so fast that each user seems to be the sole user of the computer. One example of a time sharing system is a bank's bank card system, which allows hundreds of people to
Access at the top.
access the same program on the mainframe at the same time.
Continue.
Other operating systems operating system controls include multitasking, allowing more than one program to run or work at the same time. For example, using a desktop publishing program while a graphics program is still running. Multiprocessing, executing programs using two or more processors simultaneously. Multiprogramming, executing two or more programs at the same time using only one processor. multi-user, allowing more than one user on a computer network to access the same file at the same time.
Very good. So, as the name implies, you're basically sharing time on a single device. Could be multiple devices at the same time, but you're basically allowed to share time on that device. So it allows time sharing, allows many users to share time on a single computer. So instead of you using your laptop all of the time, you can set it up in such a way that multiple persons are allowed to use your computer, your laptop at the same time. So what happens is that each user is given a slice of the CPU time. So if you can remember in the CPU, when we looked at it, the CPU is what is used to process your data. And the CPU, I would have mentioned, is so fast that it can process faster than it can receive data. So that is why you can basically divide up the CPU now so that different persons can be able to use the CPU at the same time. And that is how time sharing is being done. So the computer works so fast that each user seems to be the sole user of the computer. Now that means you need basically a more extra fast CPU so that it can keep up with the number of persons that are using the computer. But basically the CPU is so fast that it would seem as though each person has their own CPU when using the computer, when in fact it is just maybe one CPU and it is divided among multiple persons using that CPU. Now, one example of time sharing is a bank card system, which allows hundreds of people to access the same program on the mainframe at the same time. So, the mainframe, we're going to look at this word later on in types of computer, is basically a very large computer that can support all of those users. So all of the users for that bank can access this one computer called a mainframe and be able to run the same program to see all of their information. Now all of them might think that they are accessing different computers around the world and so on, but when in fact they might be actually accessing the same computer. Other operating system controls can include, so similar to the time sharing, we have basically different examples of how your operating system carries out the time sharing. The first example is multitasking. With multitasking, it allows more than one program to work at the same time. For example, you can use a desktop publishing program while graphics program is running. So your computer is basically doing time sharing all of the time. If you can see at the bottom of my screen, you can see all of the programs that I have open. I have this software here open. I have Adobe Reader, Excel, File Explorer, I have Chrome open, and all of that can open because of multitasking. It can, the computer, the operating system, when we looked at it last week, it can schedule when programs are able to use the CPU. That was one of the features of the operating system we looked at last week. So when the operating system schedules each program to use the CPU, that is referred to as multitasking. We're allowed to use multiple programs at the same time. They're running at the same time. The next one is multiprocessing, and this allows programs, the executing of programs using two or more processors simultaneously. So with multitasking, it's basically one CPU, and we divide up that CPU like time sharing so that multiple programs can run at the same time. But with multiprocessing, programs can be executed with two or more processors at the same time. So instead of one processor running the program, you can have two or more, which speeds up the process. For those of you who may not know, your CPU is actually made up of multiple CPUs. We call them cores, CORE, and that is how your CPU is able to do multiprocessing, multitasking, multiprocessing, and so on. So each one of these squares that you're seeing here is actually different CPUs, multiple CPUs that are basically combined into one CPU on your computer. So the program now can be split across these different cores or these different CPUs in order to process faster. The important thing to remember is that multiprocessing uses two or more processors. Now, multiprogramming is executing two or more programs at the same time using only one processor. So that is basically your computer. You have one processor. A processor is another word for the CPU in your computer. Central processing unit. Processor is the same thing. So that one processor inside of your computer, it can execute two or more programs. That is referred to as multi-programming. And multi-user, that is allowing more than one user on a computer network to access the same file at the same time. So a network is basically like how at home you have your Wi-Fi and everyone in your home can connect to that Wi-Fi and get internet access. That is referred to as a network. Later on, we'll be learning more about networks. But that is the basic idea behind a network. The Wi-Fi that you have at home, that is an example of a network. Now, all of you that are inside of that home can connect to the Wi-Fi and be able to access the internet or any file that is on the internet, maybe a Word document, a picture. So that is an example of multi-user. More than one person, more than one user being on this network and they're able to access the same file. So all of that falls under time sharing. Being able to do multiple things at the same time with the same device. Any questions on time sharing before we move on? Yes or no?
No, sir.
No.
Alright, so the next type of processing is online and real-time processing. It's basically two types of processing, but they're so closely related to each other. That is why they are grouped together. That's why it's called AND. There's an AND between it because it's two types of processing, but they're so closely related they are grouped together. So let's look at what is online and real-time processing. Sahid Osman, can you read for us? Sahid? Seems Sahid is not there. Ryan, can you read for us?
Sir, where?
Online and real-time processing.
Okay. Online and real-time processing. Computers and peripheral devices are online when they are connected to a main processor and turned on, so that the operator can interact with them. Printers are online, for example, when they are ready to receive data from the computer to print. Most printers have an online button you can press to turn on the machine. If it is turned off, then you are offline. You can also be online if you are connected to, say, the internet through a modem or network.
Good. You can pause
A
there.
real time processing system.
You can pause there. So I'm going to take this paragraph here first because I want you guys to understand the difference between online and real time. Because when it means that you're online, it basically means that the device is turned on. So that's the simplest way to remember it. That the device is basically on. So if it is offline, it means that the device is basically off. So computers, peripheral devices such as printers and so on, when they are on, yes, when these devices are on and they're connected to the computer, notice they have to be connected to the computer, basically to the main processor, in order to carry out any instructions and so on. When they're connected and when they're turned on, that is when they are online because at then we can interact with them. So if they're turned on but they are not connected to the computer, then they're not online. So we cannot use them in any way to be able to process any data. So they have to be turned on and they have to be connected at the same time in order to be online. Now, so an example is a printer. It has an online button or basically a power button that would allow you to turn that printer on. But also at the same time, when you turn that printer on, there's a cable that you need to connect to your printer to your computer in order for it to be online on your computer. Some printers have Wi-Fi, so it is the same there also. Now, online also refers to when you are connected to the internet through a modem or a network again. For example, your Wi-Fi. So, your device being on and connected to the internet, your phone being on and connected to the internet, can also be referred to as being online. So, what is real time processing now? Robert, can you read for us?
Real-time processing system processes data without significant delay, making the making it almost up to date. Since a processing system must be connected to one or more computers to process data, then it must be online. However, note that online does not necessarily imply that processing is real time, since there may be some delay with an online system. Examples of real time processing system include aeroplane landing control systems, electronic funds transfer system, and ticket reservation systems.
Okay. So with a real-time processing, you can think of it as being the opposite of a batch processing. Remember, the batch processing waits for a certain amount or a certain time, and then processes that data. But with a real time, there is basically no significant delay, because you can think of it as soon as it gets the data, it would process that data. So that way now the system is always up to date with whatever data that it is using. Now, this paragraph is important to note. Since a processing system must be connected to one or more computers to process data, then it must be online. So remember I told you those two are grouped together. So in order for it to process real time, it also has to be online, basically connected and powered on in order for it to process that data in real time. However, know that online does not necessarily imply that processing is in real time. So it's a two-way road, you can think of it like a one-way road. So if it is real time, then it has to be online, because if it's real time, it has to be processing all of the time right away. It has to be ready and processing, ready to process at any point in time. So that means it has to be online all of the time in order to process at real time. But a device that is online, that does not mean it is processing in real time. That does not mean it processes data right away. So there's a difference between online and real time. Real time processes right away, and online just means that it is on and it is connected. So, examples of real time, we have airplane landing control systems, electronic fund transfer systems, and ticket reservation system. So imagine now you your parent went to the ATM, they're going to collect money, to get money to pay for something, and they're at the ATM, they put in their card, they say they want 5,000. Now, how would you feel if you had to wait a day or a month in order to get that 5,000? You might be annoyed. You might be wondering why you have to wait so long. It's your money. So you can think of that scenario as to how useful the different kind of processing is. Things, information, data that we need right away, then we would use real-time processing so that we can get that data or that information right away. But if we do not need something right away, if it can wait, if it can be processed later on, then we would implement a batch processing. So it all depends on basically the need of that data. So when it comes to the advantages of real time and offline and online, we have that there is no significant delay. So basically we don't have to wait. So if you go to the ATM, you don't have to wait to get your money. Your money comes out within a few seconds. Information is always up to date. So whatever transactions you are doing, it gets updated in the system right away. If you made a purchase online on Amazon for 5,000, then that information is updated in real time into the bank so that they can see that information right away. Now, what is the disadvantage? The computer needs to be dedicated to that task solely or only. So it can only carry out that one task. So remember, the advantage for batch processing was that we can schedule time on the computer. Because remember, for batch processing, it is waiting for data. So that while it is waiting, it can do other things. But that is a disadvantage for real time. It always has to be up and ready to process that data. Because remember, it's processing real time. So it has to be online all of the time, solely dedicated to carrying out this one task only. And the other disadvantage is that the computer needs to be continually online. So if it goes offline, then no data can be processed. You can't get your money at the ATM. You can't make any purchases online. So that is why these computers need to be online all of the time. And that is a disadvantage because if it goes offline, then you are losing services to your customer. Your customer what is the word? Dissatisfied, and so on. So, any questions on all online and real-time processing? Yes or no?
No, sir.
I like how only one person is saying no. So, the last topic, data transfer. And to take our first paragraph, we'll have Rhodesia.
Data transfer. Most computer users will, at some time or another, need to transfer files between computers. School students may need to transfer their work from a computer at home to the school network via cloud-based storage. By using a secondary storage device, such as a flash memory stick, or by emailing the work to themselves to retrieve when they are at school. Uploading data involves transferring data from your computer to another computer on the network or the internet, while downloading involves receiving data to your computer from another computer on the network or the internet. Updates to software packages such as Microsoft Office are downloaded from the internet using File Transfer Protocol (FTP).
Good, you can pause.
Before trans
So, at one point or another, you will need to transfer data from one location to another. And more than likely, you guys have already done this before. You may have a flash drive, you have a game on it, and you would transfer it to another computer. You have a phone, you have a song, you would transfer it to your phone. All of that is transferring data. Now, there's two terms that you need to remember. Uploading, this refers to transferring that data from your computer to another computer. So, for example, if we use WhatsApp as an example, all of you are using WhatsApp. When you send a file to one of your friends, if you send him or her a picture or a video, that is referred to as uploading. It is transferring that data from your phone to another phone on the network or the internet, basically any other location, any other network. So just you transferring that data from your device to another is referred to as uploading. Now, downloading is when your friend sends you a video or a picture, whatever the case may be. So when you are receiving the data now to your device, that is referred to as downloading. Now, software such as Microsoft Office, they would download their updates using special software or programs. And one example is a protocol called FTP, which is the File Transfer Protocol. This is something important for you to remember. It will come in future exams and it will come for CXC. Downloading files can be used with a protocol called the File Transfer Protocol. You can upload and download with File Transfer Protocol, but you mostly use it. But for Microsoft, they would use it to download their updates to your computer. All right, so the last two paragraphs we'll have Pamela. Can you read for us?
Before transferring data, it is also sometimes necessary to reduce the file size. The process of reducing the size of a file for storage or for sending via the internet is known as file compression. WinZip and
RAR.
WinRAR are popular programs for compressing files. They can they can also be used to group files together into a single file for easier transmission. File compression is important because some files can take up a large amount of disk storage space. The larger the file size, the longer it takes to send via the internet. Users of the internet will also know that web pages containing pictures can take a long time to load. Some popular file formats use smaller file sizes than others because they are compressed file types.
Okay. So there's another term here that you need to remember, and that term is file compression. Now, when you are, most of you would notice this if you're sending a file to your friend or if you're uploading a file to your status, you would notice if it's a video, how long that file would take to send. Because the larger the file is, the longer it will take to upload. So there are cases where you might need to reduce the file size in order to transfer that file faster. So the process of reducing that file size is known as file compression. So reducing that file size, either for storage or for sending that file, is known as file compression. Now, two examples of software that are used for file compression are WinZip and WinRAR. Remember, these are softwares or programs that are used for file compression. File compression refers to reducing the file size, and examples of the programs are WinZip and WinRAR. Now, another use of file compression is being able to group multiple files together so that you can send a single file. For those of you who might be familiar with downloading games, you would notice that the files for those games are inside of a single file. So that makes it easier for transmission. So say for instance you have like 10 photos to send to your friend. Instead of sending all 10 photos, you can group all of those photos into a single file with file compression and just have to send one file. Now, a benefit of file compression is that some files can take up large amounts of storage space, and file compression can help to reduce that file size. We looked at sizes of data a while ago about megabytes, gigabytes, and so on. So, if we store a lot of videos, like for those who watch a lot of anime, it may take up a lot of storage. So in these cases, you can use file compression to reduce those video sizes so that it takes up lesser space on your computer and you basically have more space for more files. Now, the larger the file size, the longer it takes to send via the internet. I would have mentioned that before. If you're sending a long video on WhatsApp, you would notice how longer it would take than to send a shorter video. All of you that were uploading videos for my assignment, you would notice how long it took you to send that video. That is because persons did not listen to me to upload a small file, a small video, a short video. That is why I would have told you to record a short video, because the shorter the video, that means the smaller the file size, and that way it would have uploaded faster. But some of you recorded 5 minutes, 4 minutes, how many long minutes of video, and it took you longer to submit those videos. So the larger the file size, the longer it will take to upload any kind of data. So persons who develop websites, they would implement this into their website. They would know that certain file sizes are too large, and that is why certain websites might take a while to load, because you have to download all of the content that's on the website. So that is why they would use file formats that would give them smaller file sizes so that pages on the website will be able to load faster. So the smaller the file size that you can use, the better, the faster information and data will be able to load. So some examples of file compression we have for graphics, video, and music. So Crystal Dunn, can you read for us? The first one, you go across graphics and then read the compression file format. Crystal?
Sir, most people mics aren't working.
Okay, Kezia,
Yes, sir.
can you read for us? You read the type of data and then you read the compressed file format for that one.
Types of data to be compressed. Graphics. Compressed file format. G. Short Photographic Experts Group. A common image file found on computers and the internet. PNG. Portable Narrative Graphic. A common image file format to find on computer and the internet. Music. MP3. A digital audio file for listening to music on computers and digital media devices. Version PEG. Moving Pictures Expert Group. MP4 files can also contain audio, video, images, and text data.
All right, thank you. So most of you should be familiar with these file formats, these compressed file formats: JPEG, PNG, MP3, MP4. So if you ever download an image from Chrome or any browser, um, you would notice that that file would end with a dot .jpg, we say JPEG, or even PNG. So there are other kinds of compressed file formats, but these are the popular ones that you would um, commonly find. So JPEG stands for Joint Photographic Experts Group. PNG stands for Portable Network Graphic. MP3, that is used for music, and MPEG or MP4 is what you will use for video. Now, as per normal, you will find these questions here as homework. You'll find it in a Google form, and I'll post that later in a few minutes. Now, in review for today, we looked at data processing. In order for us to be able to make use of data, we need to process it first in some way that we can use it. So there are different ways that we can process data. We looked at batch processing, which waits on a certain period or a certain amount and then processes that data. We looked at time sharing, which can use a single device, a single computer, a single CPU, and share it with multiple users. And then we looked at online and real-time processing. Online refers to that device being powered on, and it is also connected to the system in order to be used. Real-time refers to the data being processed immediately or right away. So remember, if a device is real time, that means it also has to be online. But if a device is online, that does not mean it is real time. So remember that one. And lastly, we looked at data transfer. Remember that uploading refers to you basically transferring or sending data, and downloading refers to receiving that data. We looked at file compression. That refers to reducing a file size so that we can basically send or store that data. And lastly, we looked at different file compressions that we use for different types of data. As I mentioned, these questions will be in your homework form. This has brought us to the end of today's class. If you guys don't have any other questions, you are free to leave.
Excuse me, sir. Are we getting close to the end of